All right, folks, welcome to our April Outturn preview. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Euan Campbell and Julien Willems from the Society Spirits team. Unfortunately, we can't be together in person this time. I personally am suffering from a stinking cold and don't want to share it with anyone. And Julien is on standby. For any minute, he's got to grab the bag and go to the hospital because he's about to become a daddy for the first time. So I'm glad you can make it, Julien. We'll try not to take too long with the podcast. You must be on high alert.
Yeah, I am. But, anything to keep my mind occupied at this point.
At least you've got some whiskey ready, I'm sure, to wet the baby's head.
One thing at a time. We'll see about that. But yeah, have a couple of bottles in mind.
Well, we've got some great stuff coming out in April, casting an eye across different flavour profiles. It strikes me that deep, rich and dried fruits is well represented in April. How many have we got here? 6 offerings in deep, rich and dried fruits. Anything that catches your eye there, Julien?
Yeah, there's a couple that really catch my eye. Let's just talk, for instance, about the 55.70, which is one of them whiskies from the Highlands that has, so here spent quite a bit of time in a first fill Spanish oak Oloroso hogshead, which kind of means that it's going to be more on the tannic heavy side. But if you're if you're a sherried whiskey lover, this is definitely something you'll be looking forward to. Then I think the other one that really strikes me as really interesting is the 64.139, which is also Spanish oak Oloroso. So that's a fun comparison to make, and they're just like 1 year apart, these two whiskies. So that's certainly something worth considering as a pair.
And how can you resist a bottle that's called The Devil Drinks Oloroso, the 64.139, a cracking name. Anything else there, Euan, in deep, rich and dried fruits?
Yeah, I like the look of the 44.165. We've got a Speyside heavier distillate worm tub and complemented very nicely by the sort of sweetness of American oak and Pedro Jimenez. So, again, the ones that Julien mentioned, you've got Spanish oak Oloroso, and for this one, a slightly heavier spirit with American oak and PX, so nice toasty vanilla flavours, and then very rich kind of dessert vibes as well to that one. Good age on it as well.
Yeah, and another good name, 44.165, is PX I Love You. So tasting panel having a bit of fun with that.
We do love a kind of a play on words, don't we? A bit of fun.
Can't resist it. And heavily peated this month. This is one we don't see so much of, but somehow we've ended up with 4 bottlings in heavily peated. This
like buses.
Yeah,
4
yeah.
At once.
Yeah, so quite a nice choice here. What's catching your eye, Euan?
I'm going to go for the 10.243. So this is just a classic example of quite naked distillate, big smoky variant of the whiskey produced at distillery number 10, and just in a very well-used refill hogshead. So not a lot of colour in here, and it just lets the spirit shine, the smoke, the cereal kind of shines through. But in contrast, we've got a 10.244, which is in a second fill Oloroso hogshead. So pretty much filled within a week of each other, those 2 casks. But the latter having spent the best part of 4 years in that second cask. So these would be a super interesting pair, the same distillation run, filled within a week, 2 different cask journeys, same flavour profile, big colour difference. What more do you want?
Yeah, really nice comparison there from an Islay distillery that many people associate with a non-peated expression, but these are very much in the heavily peated flavour profile category. Anything else there, Julien, that you like the look of?
Yeah, I think if you move away from Islay and you look at 16.87, which is called Down with Subtlety, I think that this is something that illustrates a point with heavily peated whiskies, is that because you kind of distill longer to get every single bit of peat that you can from your distillation, you get sometimes heavier, more difficult spirits. But in this case, it's very well balanced with a heavy charred cask, a heavy charred hogshead. So it's number 4 char, which means you can't do much higher than that, really, unless you just want to have a carbon fiber cask or something. But long story short, this is something that will bring a lot of richness to that whiskey, a lot more. There's going to be a lot more to it. It's quite intense as a cask, so this will help balance that really heavy distillery from number 16. The heavy distillate, sorry. Then I think looking outside of Scotland, I think if we go down to Norfolk, we'll see that there is also a bottle that comes out in a heavily peated profile, which is 137.19, which turns out is from a second fill bourbon barrel, but has taken quite a bit of color as well from that barrel. And it just follows the same trend that the number 16 follows as well. So these, again, are probably really interesting to sort of taste side by side, because if you're going to try and put that number 16 next to anything else, it also needs to be heavily peated, or you're going to not taste one of the whiskies.
Yeah, they're definitely pretty robust, and I like the tasting panel description of the 16.87 Down with Subtlety. They just call it mad and brilliant. So you've been warned, but I think for many of our society members, that's exactly what they're looking for. Something that's kind of mad and also brilliant at the same time.
Just to add a little bit more for the 137.19, so this is one that's being released for St. George's Day, and actually the reason for the color, the dark color on this one, is that it was in a charred new oak barrel for around a year to begin with, and then it was moved to this second fill bourbon. So it's quite an interest. It's almost like a start in a really active cask and then left to mellow for a bit longer.
A priming rather than a finishing, really.
Yeah, pretty interesting approach, that one.
Nice. And some interesting examples of the influence of different kinds of production on whiskey. I think, Julien, you picked out a couple of whiskies here that have have used worm tub condensers, the 44.165 that we mentioned, and also 85.73 extravagance meets timeless elegance. Just tell us about the difference that a worm tub can make to the process.
So, worm tubs are, if you want, the old school way of cooling down the spirit vapors using a sort of coil of copper tubing that is immersed in a bath of water. You will see that in 16 distilleries in Scotland currently. But nowadays, most distilleries have a tendency to rely on condenser boxes, which are allow for much more copper contact. Essentially, it means that this will scrub out anything that is a bit meaty, a bit sulfury from those modern spirits. And you could achieve the same result or a similar result with a worm tub if you used it in the proper way. But the goal, if you still have those today, is to probably produce something that is heavier, a bit meatier. But even then, all distilleries don't use it in the same way. Distillery 44 will generally be quite heavy on their use of the worm tub, and it will yield a very meaty spirit that ages particularly well. 85 as a distillery has a bit more of a light-handed approach of this. So it adds to the complexity without making it as heavy as 44. So in those two cases, you can just take in different uses of the same device. And this is quite interesting because it shows you that it doesn't always have to be that heavy spirit that we sometimes, well, very often talk about when we mention worm tubs. It can also be very elegant and very delicate.
Yeah, nice. And a couple of examples, Euan, from basically it's the same distillery, really. It's this or distilling complex more than anything else. We've got 122.55 Tiptoe to the Tropics and 112.113 Perfumatory Glory. Different distillery numbers and different processes, really. What can you tell us about the difference between these?
Yeah, this is a super interesting pair. Just looking at the dates, the fill dates, you're talking, a little over a week apart. In fact, a week apart. So one of them, the 112 spirit, is produced in a really interesting still with a straight neck, and the spirit's collected at a high strength, so quite a narrow cut. And there's also a water cooling system that increases reflux, so really cleans up the spirit and gives lots of copper contact. For the other one, I think basically they simply turn off the cooling head and collect at a slightly lower strength, so there's a wider cut. So a really interesting way of using one still to create two different spirit types. Now, these are both first fill bourbon barrels, exactly the same age, and just a really interesting comparison to make.
Yeah, nice. Quite for anyone that's been to that distillery, and I know we paid a visit a few years ago now, Euan, but it's really something to see the variety of stills that they've got in operation. And I guess that's why the society has different codes for what's basically one distillery, but there's so many different forms of production going on within that distillery.
Yeah, I mean, they're making everything from grain whiskey, that, your kind of traditional grain whiskey in huge column stills, through to, in fact, G15.8 is also on this list, is grain whiskey made there in slightly smaller column stills, continuous stills, but they use 100% malted barley, so playing a different tune again. And then they make peated variants of that grain at G15. There'll be heavier pot still styles, the two we've already discussed. So it's really quite remarkable. I think I'm not sure if it's still produced, but at one point this distillery made a blended whiskey where all the components were made on site, which was quite a unique thing in the industry at the time.
Yeah, quite a place. Unfortunately, no visitor centre, but for anyone, if they get the chance to get a look around, it's well worth a visit. In terms of a different form of production, we have got a nice offering from Distillery 5, 5.115 Cocoa and Kiwi coming out in April. And again, Julien, this is fairly unique within Scotland in terms of its production, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a malt that's been triple distilled, which tends to not be the standard in Scotland, although it is seen. Throughout different distilleries, you have different ways of distilling, and turns out that double distillation is not always the standard. Many makes have a tendency to do something slightly different. But here we're talking about triple distillation, and it's based on the West Coast, particularly in Glasgow. So you could nearly be forgiven for thinking that there's an Irish influence there, but I can't say that for sure anyway. But certainly this is one of the few examples of triple distilled malt in Scotland. So
it's a really high collection strength and narrow cut with this one as well. I think I want to say it's like above 80% or something is the collection strength. We attended a tasting hosted by this distillery at the Vaults, and I was quite taken aback by that. It's quite a unique feature.
To some extent, it's nearly worth actually comparing this to 112 as a distillate.
Yeah,
because it's two different ways to sort of arrive at the same result. Not that they're the same in any way, shape, or form, but I think aiming for a very light, fruity distillate is what they're both doing.
Both ended up in this spicy and sweet flavor profile there as well. Any other flavor profiles that you want to pick out this month, Euan?
I would probably, within spicy and sweet, just draw attention to an interesting cask type that jumps out for 100.40. So this one is a Shiraz cask that came all the way from Australia. So the colour on this one is quite intriguing to look at. Very dark with quite a sort of borderline kind of ruby-ish, reddy tinge to it. So I mean, that's just something that type of cask is, part of a handful that we got hold of when they were imported. So yeah, just really interesting to try something a bit different in that one.
Yeah. Julien, any other picks for you?
Yeah, for me, this is I think a message that I like to hammer, but it's the 66.237 for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it's an old and dignified dram, and we don't see that many of those. So it's certainly worth getting your hands on that if you like that. Then it's also a peated distillate, so age and peat oft work well together. And the other thing that I've talked about at length in other podcasts and videos is that this has been distilled in 1998, which is before this distillery transitioned to a more modern heating for their stills. So this is still direct fired for their still. They had coal furnaces for their stills at the time. So they kept on doing that for a few years after that, but it's worth noting that these are the last vintages you will see of that make made in that particular fashion. And this one is also in a refill bourbon hogshead. So it really leaves a lot of space for that distillate to just expand and give you a really good idea of what it was made of and how it was made in the day.
I think at this age as well, Distillery 66 shows really well. It's a really foodie dram to me. It always just reminds me of delicious sauces and Balmoral chicken or something like that. Always makes me hungry when I try older whiskies from Distillery 66.
Yeah, lovely. And for anyone who's looking to celebrate St. George's Day, the 23rd of April, we do have an English whiskey, which we already spoke about, from Norfolk, cask 137.19, dark, sweet smoke and spicy oak, one of the heavily peated bottlings coming out in April. But one of the other ones that really caught my eye for April is not a whiskey at all. It is one of our Armagnacs, A9.1 Muscovado Meringue. So you and I had the pleasure of a trip to the Armagnac region again a few years ago, and for me it's just a kind of unappreciated gem of the spirits world, Armagnac, and this one looks absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, well, that was some trip. It will live long in the memory. Yeah, this is amazing. This one, a 0.1 release, and it's difficult to say whether we'll get much more of this because it's an incredibly small production. Only around one cask produced per year. It is 100% Baco is the grape style, which is probably my favourite. It lends itself to the kind of deeper, fruitier tobacco, sort of exotic tea leaf type notes. It's distilled by a small wood-fired still on site, and just a rare opportunity to try an incredibly delicious hen's teeth type of spirit. So that's it. There's only 430 odd bottles of that. So
yeah, the fact that these, as you say, it could only be one cask per year that's produced from some of the farms in that area, then hen's teeth is a good way to describe it. But I saw that Denis Legourge from Chateau de Lobade is appearing at the Vaults on the 10th of April for a tasting. And we met Denis when we were over there in Armagnac. A lovely guy, and great to see him coming over to Leith to kind of share the love for Armagnac. So I think that's a tasting for anyone who's interested in finding out more about Armagnac, that that's the one that you should get along to on the 10th of April at the Vaults.
Yeah, and look out for bottlings from A5. That's all I'll say. Yeah,
fantastic. And then one more in the single cask spirits category. Julien, you fancy the rum R2.18?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, so this is a rum from Guyana, which you don't see that many of them on the shelf these days. But it's certainly worth your while given the age of this, as it was distilled, I think, in 2003. Let me check if I'm not saying anything.
I think it's 04. So you're
04. So 2004.
18 years.
So indeed, 18 years of age. So that's certainly worth your while, and it's more of a robust rum, generally. So if you're in for a sensory overload, I would sort of suggest you have a dram of this, if not a bottle.
Definitely. Good stuff. Okay, folks, I think that is the Whistle Stop tour that you all need. Plenty to choose from, great variety, and lots to look out for in April. I think I need to choose something to make myself a wee hot toddy. Julien, I hope you've got something nice lined up for celebrating the baby's arrival. But thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks to Julien and Euan, as always, for your amazing insights into what's coming up. And look out for these bottles coming out in April for the next Outturn. So cheers to everyone, and catch up with you soon.